She's just a nobody, Mom laughed at me. Until my brother's fiancé Googled my name and everything changed. Hi, I'm Rachel Thompson, 32 years old, sitting at my parents' mahogany dining table for what was supposed to be a celebratory dinner. My family has always treated me like I'm invisible, the forgettable daughter who never quite measured up. She's just a nobody with some office job. My mother Barbara laughed dismissively when my brother's fiancée Jessica asked what I do. Nobody at that table could have predicted what would happen when Jessica picked up her phone and typed my name into Google. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from today? If you're enjoying this already, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how my family's faces changed when they discovered who I really am. I grew up in Westlake, Ohio, a tidy suburban neighborhood where appearance was everything and status was measured by the size of your home and the colleges your children attended. Our two-story colonial, with its pristine lawn and seasonal wreaths on the front door, was the perfect setting for the family my mother Barbara wanted everyone to see. Inside those walls, the family dynamic was crystal clear. My mother, with her perfectly highlighted hair and country club membership, orchestrated our lives with precision. Everything revolved around image and achievement. My father Thomas, an accountant at a respected firm, was kind in his quiet way, but ultimately deferred to my mother in all family matters. He was the definition of passive, always choosing peace over confrontation, even when it meant sacrificing my feelings in the process. Then there was my brother Michael, 3 years older and the undisputed star of our family. From his first Little League home run to his high school valedictorian speech, Michael could do no wrong. His room was a shrine to achievement, gleaming sports trophies, academic medals, and framed acceptance letters. My parents attended every baseball game, every debate tournament, every awards ceremony. They beamed from the front row, taking endless photos and bragging to anyone who would listen. "That's our son," my mother would say, emphasizing "our" as if Michael were their only child. My earliest memory of disappointment came when I was 8 years old. I had written a short story about a girl who discovered she could talk to animals. My third-grade teacher had given me an A+ and written extraordinary imagination across the top. I ran home, bursting with pride, eager to show my parents. "Mom, Dad, look what I wrote," I announced, waving my story in the air. My mother glanced at it briefly. "That's nice, Rachel, but we're getting ready for Michael's science fair. Put it on the counter and we'll look at it later." Later never came. When I found my story days afterward, it was stained with coffee rings, unread and forgotten. This pattern continued throughout my childhood. In 6th grade, when I won a district-wide writing competition, neither of my parents attended the ceremony. Michael had a baseball game the same day. "You understand, don't you, Rachel?" my father said gently. "This is an important game for your brother." I understood perfectly. I was learning my place in the family hierarchy. High school brought more of the same. I joined the school newspaper, eventually becoming editor-in-chief. I won state awards for my editorials and short fiction. My byline appeared in teen magazines and local papers. Each achievement was met with the same lukewarm response from my family. "Writing is a nice hobby, Rachel," my mother would say, "but it's not a real career plan. You should focus on something practical like business or nursing." Even when my story was published in a national anthology for young writers, my parents declined to buy a copy. Meanwhile, they framed Michael's college acceptance letters and hung them in the living room for visitors to admire. By the time I left for college, I had stopped sharing my achievements with my family. I chose a university in New York as far from Ohio as my scholarship would take me. The distance wasn't just geographical. I was creating emotional space to become someone apart from the invisible daughter I'd been at home. During those 4 years, I bloomed. My professors praised my writing, encouraged my voice, and pushed me to submit my work to publications. Small successes accumulated. A poem here, a short story there. Each publication was a brick in the foundation of my confidence, built without my family's knowledge or approval. When I came home for holidays, I answered vague questions about how school was going with equally vague responses. I learned that speaking about my passions only invited dismissal, so I kept my growing success to myself. I sat through endless dinners, listening to updates about Michael's business classes, his internship prospects, his girlfriend from a good family. After graduation, when I announced my intention to stay in New York and pursue writing, my mother's reaction was predictably dismissive. "New York is so expensive, Rachel. You'll be back home within 6 months when you can't pay rent," she predicted confidently. "Maybe you can get a job at the community college if you want to stay close to books." My father, in his typical fashion, tried to mediate. What your mother means is that we worry about you. Writing is a tough business. We just don't want you setting yourself up for disappointment, my mother added, as if disappointment wasn't already the primary emotion I associated with family interactions. Over the years, as my adult life took shape in New York, I developed two separate existences. There was Rachel, the accomplished writer with a growing reputation in literary circles, and Rachel, the disappointing daughter who worked some job in publishing as far as her family knew. The disconnect was painful but protective. I couldn't bear to offer my achievements only to have them diminished again. Phone calls home became exercises in omission. I listened to news about Michael's promotions, my mother's social committee accomplishments, neighborhood gossip, never volunteering information about my own life that mattered to me. I became skilled at deflection, turning questions back on the asker, keeping my responses superficial. Some might wonder why I maintained any relationship with my family at all. The answer is complicated, wrapped in layers of hope, obligation, and the stubborn belief that someday they might see me, really see me. Despite everything, they were my family, and some childish part of me still longed for their approval, even as the adult in me recognized how unlikely that was to ever happen. So I continued my twice-yearly visits home, steeling myself each time for the familiar feeling of fading into the background, of being overlooked and underestimated. I became the family ghost, present but not quite real in their eyes. And I learned to find validation elsewhere, building a life rich with meaningful friendships and professional respect that my family knew nothing about. When I moved to New York after college, I carried little more than 2 suitcases, my laptop, and determined optimism. My mother's prediction about failing within 6 months hung over me like a challenge. I was prepared for struggle, but the reality of breaking into the publishing industry in New York was even harder than I'd anticipated. I found a tiny apartment in Brooklyn that I shared with 2 other aspiring creatives. My first job was as a barista at a coffee shop near Union Square, working morning shifts so I could use afternoons to drop off applications at publishing houses and literary agencies. At night, I wrote at a wobbly desk crammed into the corner of my bedroom, often until 2 or 3 in the morning. Rejection letters accumulated. I taped them to my wall as motivation rather than discouragement. Each no brought me one step closer to an eventual yes or so, I told myself during moments of doubt. My first break came 8 months after arriving in New York. I landed an entry-level position as an assistant at a small but respected literary magazine. The pay was barely enough to cover rent and ramen, but the experience was invaluable. I absorbed everything about the publishing process, from evaluating submissions to copy editing to production. It was there I met Eleanor Montgomery, a senior editor whose sharp eye and sharper tongue made junior staff members tremble. Eleanor was a legend in literary circles, known for discovering major talents and her uncompromising editorial standards. For reasons I never fully understood, she took an interest in my career. "You have a voice," she told me after reading a piece I'd been working on during lunch breaks. "Raw, but distinctive. Keep writing." Coming from Eleanor, this was equivalent to effusive praise. Under her mentorship, my writing evolved. She pushed me to be more daring, to find the vulnerable places in my narratives and dig deeper. When I complained about her brutal feedback, she was unsympathetic. "If you want gentle encouragement, join a community writing circle," she said. "If you want to be published, listen to me." I listened. And I wrote. After my day job, after social obligations, sometimes in the early hours of the morning when the city briefly quieted. I developed a discipline that bordered on obsession. My first published piece in a notable literary journal came 2 years after moving to New York. I still remember staring at my name in print, running my fingers over the letters as if they might disappear. I called no one from my family. Instead, I celebrated with friends who understood what this milestone meant. From there, momentum built gradually. My byline appeared in increasingly prestigious publications. Editors began to recognize my name in submission piles. Literary agents started reaching out to ask if I was working on a book. My first manuscript, a collection of interconnected short stories examining the invisible threads binding families across generations, took 3 years to complete. When it sold to a respected independent publisher, I felt a validation that no family approval could match. The book, titled Beneath Silent Waters, was published when I was 27. The initial print run was modest, but the critical response exceeded everyone's expectations. The New York Times Book Review called it a stunning debut from a writer of uncommon insight. The New Yorker included me in their Writers to Watch feature. Literary awards followed. For the book tour, I traveled to 12 cities across America and then to London, Paris, and Berlin. In each location, readers approached me with stories about how my writing had touched them, how they saw their own family dynamics reflected in my characters. The irony wasn't lost on me that strangers connected so deeply with work my own family had never read. I chose to publish under Rachel Thompson rather than my full name, Rachel and Davis Thompson, which partially explained why my family might not have stumbled across my work online. It wasn't a conscious decision to hide, more a separation between my writing identity and the daughter who still visited Ohio twice a year. My second book, a novel titled The Weight of Unsaid Things, became what the industry calls a sleeper hit, starting with modest sales that grew steadily through word of mouth until it landed on the bestseller list 8 months after publication. The paperback edition featured quotes from famous authors I'd once studied in college classes. Surreal didn't begin to describe the feeling. By 30, I had an agent, a respected publisher, and the kind of career most writers dream about. My apartment in Brooklyn was no longer shared but my own, with a dedicated office where awards and framed book covers hung on walls. My work was taught in university creative writing programs. I gave guest lectures at Columbia, NYU, and other prestigious institutions. When introduced at literary events, the list of my accomplishments took longer and longer to recite. And yet, when I flew home for Christmas or my mother's birthday, I was still just Rachel, the daughter who had some vague job in publishing. The cognitive dissonance was sometimes overwhelming. "Are you still at that magazine?" My mother would ask vaguely over holiday dinners. "I'm working on different projects now." I'd answer truthfully, but incompletely. "You know, Michael just got another promotion." She'd continue, and the conversation would shift away from me once again. The most recent development in my career came just 3 months before the family dinner that would change everything. My second novel had been optioned for film by an Academy Award-winning producer. I'd been flown to Los Angeles for meetings, put up in a luxury hotel, and treated like my words mattered enormously. The contrast between my professional respect and family invisibility had never been so stark. I sometimes asked myself why I continued to compartmentalize my life, why I didn't simply announce my accomplishments at the next family gathering. The answer was both simple and complex. I was protecting myself. After years of having my passion dismissed, my achievements minimized, I couldn't bear to offer my success only to have it treated as insignificant. The thought of my mother saying, "That's nice, dear," about my film deal made my stomach clench. So, I maintained the separation, even as it created a hollow space inside me. In professional settings, I was confident, articulate, praised. In family settings, I reverted to the quiet, overlooked daughter, carefully hiding the life I'd built. "Why do you still go home at all?" My friend Samantha asked me once, after I returned from a particularly difficult Thanksgiving visit. I had no simple answer. There was the complicated love I still felt for my family despite everything. There was hope, however faint, that someday things might change. And there was something else, a conviction that running away completely would mean they had won, had succeeded in making me believe I was truly invisible. So I kept visiting. And I kept succeeding. And the gap between my two lives grew wider with each passing year. Until the night it all collapsed, when my brother brought his new fiancée home to meet the family, and everything I'd built and everything I'd hidden collided in a single Google search. My parents still lived in the same house where I grew up, a fact that made each visit home feel like stepping back in time. As I pulled into the driveway that evening, I noticed fresh flowers planted in the front beds and new curtains in the living room windows. My mother always made special preparations when Michael visited, another small reminder of the family hierarchy. I parked behind an unfamiliar BMW that I assumed belonged to Jessica, my brother's fiancée. This would be our first meeting, and I couldn't help feeling curious about the woman who had captured my brother's heart. Michael had dated many women over the years, but none had made it to the meet the parents stage. The front door opened before I could ring the bell. My father stood there, gray hair neatly combed, wearing what I recognized as his good sweater. "Rachel, you made it," he said, giving me a brief, awkward hug. "Everyone's in the living room." I followed him through the foyer, passing the familiar gallery wall of family photos. I noted that the most recent additions were all of Michael, his graduate school graduation, vacation photos, none featuring me. It was like watching my gradual erasure from family history. In the living room, my mother was laughing at something, the performative laugh she used in social situations. She looked up as I entered, her smile remaining but cooling several degrees. "Rachel, finally. We were about to start without you." She gestured toward the attractive couple on the sofa. You remember what traffic is like, I said, leaning in for the obligatory cheek kiss. Michael stood, looking genuinely pleased to see me. Rachel, come meet Jessica. I turned my attention to the woman rising gracefully from the sofa. Jessica was tall and slim with intelligent eyes and a warm smile. She wore simple but obviously expensive clothes that suggested taste and confidence rather than showing off. I've heard so much about you, Jessica said, extending her hand. Michael says you live in New York. I love visiting the city. All good things, I hope, I replied with a smile, ignoring my mother's barely audible snort. Shall we move to the dining room? My mother suggested. I've had the roast in for hours. The dining room was set with a good china and crystal, another honor typically reserved for Michael's visits or my mother's bridge club luncheons. I noted the seating arrangement with a familiar resignation, my father at the head of the table, my mother at the foot, Michael and Jessica on one side, and me alone on the other. Furthest from both parents. My mother had outdone herself with the meal, roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, garlic mashed potatoes, honey-glazed carrots, and homemade rolls. It was Michael's favorite menu, the one she prepared for special celebrations. Jessica, tell us again how you two met, my mother prompted after pouring the wine. I want Rachel to hear the story. Jessica smiled at Michael before answering. We met at a charity auction for the Children's Hospital. I was organizing the event, and Michael was there representing his firm. He outbid everyone for a weekend sailing package, even though he'd told me earlier he gets seasick. She laughed. I thought anyone that determined deserved at least one dinner. Best money I ever spent, Michael added, taking her hand. My mother beamed at them. And Jessica's family is from Shaker Heights, she told me, naming one of the most affluent suburbs of Cleveland. Her father is a cardiothoracic surgeon at Cleveland Clinic. I recognize this as my mother's shorthand for comes from money and good social standing, her highest praise. What about you, Rachel? Jessica asked, turning her attention to me. Michael mentioned you work in publishing in New York. That sounds fascinating. Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. Rachel does something with books. A small press or magazine, isn't it, dear? I opened my mouth to respond, but, she continued, nothing like Michael's position, of course. He just made partner at 35, youngest in the firm's history. It's a publishing house, I said quietly. I work with authors on their books. That must be so interesting, Jessica persisted. What kind of books do you work on? Again, my mother interrupted. Rachel's always liked to read. Remember that summer you barely left a room, always with your nose in a book? She laughed and turned to Jessica. We had to practically force her to go outside and get some sun. The conversation shifted to wedding plans. Jessica and Michael were considering a June ceremony the following year, possibly at her parents' country club. My mother was delighted, already discussing flower arrangements and menu options. I ate quietly, occasionally nodding or offering brief comments when directly addressed. This was familiar territory. Being present but not really included, the background character in the Michael show. Jessica, however, kept trying to draw me into the conversation. We're still figuring out the bridal party, she said, looking at me. But I'd love it if you'd be one of my bridesmaids, Rachel. I don't have sisters and it would mean a lot to me. I was genuinely surprised by the offer. I'd be honored, I said, touched by her inclusion. That's if Rachel can take time away from her important job, my mother commented with a thin smile. New York publishing is so demanding, apparently. Michael shot our mother look. Mom, come on. Jessica, perhaps sensing the tension, tried to redirect. What are you working on currently, Rachel? Any books we should look out for? It was the opening I'd both longed for and dreaded for years. I could tell them about my recent success, the film option, the awards. I could finally claim my accomplishments in this house where I'd been diminished for so long. But years of conditioning kicked in. I shrugged slightly. Just the usual projects. Nothing special. My mother seized the moment. She's just a nobody with some office job. She laughed dismissively. Not everyone can be as ambitious as you and Michael. The table fell silent. My father studied his plate. Michael looked uncomfortable. I felt the familiar sting, sharper for being delivered in front of someone new. Jessica's brow furrowed slightly. She looked at me with curiosity, then discreetly reached for her phone beneath the table. The wedding venue has a 6-month waiting list, my mother continued, oblivious to the awkwardness she'd created. But Jessica's mother knows the event's coordinator. As she spoke, I noticed Jessica looking down at her phone, her expression changing from curiosity to surprise, then to something like amazement. She glanced up at me, then back at her phone, scrolling with increasing interest. I had no idea what she was reading, but something told me our carefully separated worlds were about to collide. The dinner conversation continued around me, my mother dominating with wedding talk, while my father occasionally nodded in agreement. Michael contributed details about the honeymoon they were planning in Italy. I responded when necessary, but my attention was increasingly drawn to Jessica, who continued to scroll through something on her phone, her eyes widening occasionally. "We're thinking 4 or 5 tiers for the cake," my mother was saying. Nothing too ostentatious, but befitting Michael's position at the firm. Jessica looked up from her phone suddenly, her gaze fixing on me with an intensity that made me shift in my seat. "Excuse me," she said, interrupting my mother mid-sentence about cake flavors. "I hope this isn't rude, but I have to ask." She turned to me, phone still in hand. "Rachel? Are you the Rachel Thompson? The author?" The question hung in the air. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me. The silence was deafening. "What are you talking about?" my mother asked, looking confused. Jessica held up her phone, displaying what I recognized as my author page on the Penguin Random House website. "Rachel Thompson, author of Beneath Silent Waters and the Weight of Unsaid Things," she read. "Winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award and the PEN/Faulkner Award." She looked up at me, her eyes bright with excitement. "That's you, isn't it? The photo matches." My heart pounded. The moment I'd both feared and secretly fantasized about for years was happening, and I felt completely unprepared. "Let me see that," Michael said, leaning toward Jessica's phone. His eyes widened as he scrolled through whatever was on the screen. "Holy shit," he whispered, looking up at me. "Rachel, is this really you?" My father had gone completely still, forks suspended halfway to his mouth. My mother reached across the table and practically snatched the phone from Jessica's hand. "This has to be some kind of mistake," she said, but her voice lacked conviction as she stared at the screen. "Some other Rachel Thompson." "No mistake," Jessica said, taking her phone back and continuing to read. "Rachel Thompson's writing has been compared to Joan Didion and Alice Munro. Her debut collection of short stories was described by the New York Times as breathtakingly assured, and her novel spent 18 weeks on the bestseller list." She looked up at me with genuine admiration. "I can't believe this. I actually read your book last year for my book club. It was incredible." My mother's face had drained of color. My father was now leaning toward Jessica, trying to get another glimpse of the phone. "There's more," Jessica continued, clearly unaware of the family drama she was exposing. "It says here your novel has been optioned for film by Paramount, with production scheduled to begin next year." She scrolled further. "And you were just featured in the New Yorker's 40 Under 40 list of influential artists." Michael was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "Why didn't you tell us any of this?" he asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and what sounded like hurt. I took a deep breath, studying myself. This was it, the moment when my 2 separate lives collapsed into one. "I did try," I said quietly. "Many times." My mother shook her head. "That's ridiculous. You never mentioned being a famous author. We would have remembered something like that." "Actually, I did," I replied, my voice gaining strength. "When my first story was published in The Atlantic, I called home and told you. You said that's nice and changed the subject to Michael's new car." My father frowned, seeming to search his memory. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "When my book was published, I sent you both signed copies," I continued. "Did you ever open the package or read the card I included?" My father looked genuinely confused. "I don't recall any package. It came right before Christmas 3 years ago," I said. "Mom said it was probably just work stuff and put it in the guest room. I saw it there, unopened, when I visited that year." Jessica was looking increasingly uncomfortable, suddenly aware of the family dynamic she had inadvertently exposed. Michael kept glancing between me and our parents, as if trying to reconcile the sister he thought he knew with the accomplished author on Jessica's phone. "Well, you should have made it clear it was important," my mother said defensively. "You know how busy things get around the holidays." Jessica cleared her throat gently. "Your books are really quite remarkable, Rachel. The way you write about family dynamics and unspoken expectations, it's so insightful." She paused. "Actually, now that I think about it, some of those family scenes feel almost familiar." The implication hung in the air. Had I been writing about my own family all along? The answer was yes and no. My characters were fictional, but the emotional truths they navigated, the feeling of invisibility, the yearning for recognition, Those came directly from my experience in this very house. May I see? My father asked Jessica, finally finding his voice. She handed him her phone, and he put on his reading glasses to study the screen. As he read, his expression changed from confusion to something that looked almost like pride. National Book Critics Circle Award, he murmured. That's a big deal, isn't it? It's one of the most prestigious literary awards in America, Jessica confirmed. My mother was struggling to process this new reality. If you're so successful, she said with a note of skepticism, why do you still live in that tiny apartment in Brooklyn? Why don't you drive a better car? It was such a typical response, measuring success by material possessions rather than achievement or fulfillment, that I almost laughed. My apartment isn't tiny, Mom. It's a 2-bedroom in Park Slope with an office where I write. And I take the subway because parking in New York is a nightmare, not because I can't afford a car. There's a whole Wikipedia page, Jessica added, apparently oblivious to the tension as she continued scrolling. And look, here's a video of Rachel accepting her PEN/Faulkner Award. She turned her phone around to show a clip of me on stage in a black evening gown, thanking the committee and my publisher. The surreal quality of the moment intensified, my family watching a video of me accepting a major literary award while sitting at the dinner table where I'd been dismissed as just a nobody minutes earlier. The realization that I was not who they thought I was, had never been who they thought I was, seemed to hit each of them differently. My father looked bewildered, but impressed. Michael seemed shocked, but also curious. And my mother looked like her entire worldview was being challenged, her expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and something that might have been embarrassment. All this time, Michael said slowly, while we thought you were just, he trailed off, perhaps realizing there was no good way to finish that sentence. Just a nobody? I supplied, repeating my mother's words from earlier. Yes. All this time. The dinner that had been planned to celebrate Michael and Jessica's engagement had transformed into something entirely different. The balance of power had shifted, and none of us quite knew how to proceed. Jessica, perhaps sensing the rising tension, attempted to lighten the mood. I feel like I'm having dinner with a celebrity, she said with a nervous laugh. I recommended your book to everyone I know after I read it. My mother's voice cut through the air. This has to be some kind of misunderstanding. Rachel would have told us if she was a successful writer. She turned to me, her expression hardening. Why would you keep something like this from your family unless you were making it up? The accusation stung, but it was so typically my mother, unable to admit she might have been wrong, turning the situation to make herself the victim rather than acknowledging her role in my silence. I didn't keep it from you, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion building inside me. You just never listened. That's nonsense, my mother replied. We always supported your little writing hobby. Hobby? I repeated, the word like acid on my tongue. Is that what you think this is? Mom, Michael interjected. Jessica just showed us Rachel's professional author page and Wikipedia entry. This isn't a hobby. My father, still staring at Jessica's phone, looked up. There are reviews here from the New York Times, the Washington Post, pictures of you at literary events with famous people. He seemed genuinely perplexed. Why wouldn't you share this with us? The question, asked without my mother's accusatory tone, deserved an honest answer. I did try to share it with you, I said, meeting his gaze. When I got my first book deal, I called home ecstatic. Mom answered and said she couldn't talk because she was on her way to Michael's softball game. She said she'd call back, but never did. My father frowned, glancing at my mother, who avoided his eyes. When my first book was published, I continued. I sent you both signed copies with a note about how much it would mean to have your support at my New York launch event. You never responded. I checked airline prices hoping you might come, but you didn't even acknowledge receiving the books. We were probably busy, my mother said defensively. You can't expect us to drop everything for her. For what, Mom? I interrupted, years of suppressed feelings finally breaking free. For your daughter's greatest achievement? Because that's exactly what you did for Michael every single time. You never missed a single one of his games or ceremonies or celebrations. Not one. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Jessica placed a hand on his arm, her expression sympathetic. When I won my first major award, I continued. I called home from the hotel right after the ceremony, still wearing my formal dress. Dad, you answered and said Mom was asleep and you were watching a game. You said to call back tomorrow. When I did, neither of you picked up. My father's face flushed with what looked like shame. I didn't realize. I didn't know it was important. How could you not? The question burst from me with more emotion than I'd intended. How could my own parents not know or care about the most significant moments of my career? Did you ever once Google my name? Did you ever wonder what I was actually doing in New York all these years? My mother's lips thinned. You always were dramatic, Rachel. If your writing was really so successful, why wouldn't you make sure we knew about it? Because every time I tried, you changed the subject to Michael, I replied, my voice breaking slightly. Every single time. After a while, I stopped trying. It hurt too much to keep offering pieces of myself only to have them ignored. Jessica cleared her throat gently. Your novel, she said, looking at me. The one about the youngest daughter whose art is discovered after she leaves home. Was that autobiographical? Before I could answer, my mother cut in. Are you saying you wrote stories about us? About family business? How could you do something so? I write fiction. I interrupted firmly. My characters are not you. But the emotional truth of feeling invisible in your own family? Yes, I drew on that experience. Michael was looking increasingly uncomfortable. I had no idea you felt this way, he said quietly. You never said anything. Would you have listened if I had? I asked, not unkindly. You were busy being the golden child, Michael. That wasn't your fault, but it was our reality. My father, who had been scrolling through Jessica's phone, looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. Some of these reviews mention how your work explores themes of parental neglect and conditional love. His voice was quiet. Is that how you see us, Rachel? As neglectful parents? The question hung in the air, heavy with decades of unspoken hurt. I took a deep breath. I see you as parents who had room for only one successful child, I said carefully. And I wasn't that child. So I built a life and a career that didn't depend on your approval or even your awareness. And now here we are. My mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I need to clear the dessert plates, she said, though no one had finished eating. She began gathering dishes with shaking hands. Barbara, sit down. My father said with unusual firmness. This is important. What's important is that Rachel has apparently been harboring all these resentments for years, my mother replied, her voice tight, writing books about what terrible parents we are. Mom, that's not what Rachel said, Michael interrupted. And you did just call her a nobody less than an hour ago. My mother froze, plates in hand, as if she'd forgotten that comment. Jessica winced visibly. I never said you were terrible parents, I clarified. But yes, I was hurt, repeatedly. And instead of confronting you, I channeled those feelings into my writing. That's what writers do. We transform our experiences into stories. Stories that made you famous while making us look bad, my mother said bitterly. No one knows the books are connected to you, I replied. I've never said they were autobiographical. That's your guilt talking, not my words. The room fell silent. My mother remained standing, clutching the plates like a shield. My father looked lost in thought. Michael and Jessica exchanged uncomfortable glances. I considered getting up and leaving. It would be easier than continuing this painful conversation. But something kept me in my seat. Perhaps the same stubborn persistence that had kept me riding through years of rejection before my first success. I never wanted to have this conversation, I admitted. But now that we're here, maybe it's time for some honesty. I've built a life I'm proud of, a career that fulfills me. I did it without your support or acknowledgement. That shouldn't diminish your pride in Michael's accomplishments. There was always room for both of us to succeed, even if you couldn't see it. My father removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I don't know what to say, Rachel. I'm sorry we missed so much. It was the first genuine apology I'd heard in that house, and it landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. My mother's defenses seemed to crumble slightly. She set the plates down and sank back into her chair. Why didn't you make us understand? She asked, but the accusatory edge had left her voice. That wasn't my responsibility, I said gently. Parents are supposed to see their children, both of them, not just the one who fits their preferred narrative. Michael reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. I didn't see it either, he said. I'm sorry, Rachel. The acknowledgement from my brother, unexpected and sincere, brought tears to my eyes that I quickly blinked away. Jessica, who had been quiet during the confrontation, spoke up. For what it's worth, she said. Your books are beautiful. They've touched so many people. That's a rare gift. In the uncomfortable silence that followed, I realized something had fundamentally changed. The family dynamic, calcified over decades, had cracked open. What would grow in its place remained to be seen, but there was no going back to the way things had been. For better or worse, I was finally visible in my parents' home. The remainder of dinner passed in a strange mixture of tension and revelation. My mother made a half-hearted attempt to serve dessert, a chocolate mousse that sat largely untouched as the conversation continued in fits and starts. Jessica, seemingly determined to normalize the situation, asked thoughtful questions about my writing process and upcoming projects. I answered cautiously at first, then with increasing openness as I realized her interest was genuine. I'm actually working on a new novel, I admitted, sharing details of my work publicly with my family for the first time. It's about sisters separated in childhood who reconnect as adults only to discover they've been living parallel lives. That sounds fascinating, Jessica said. Will it be published next year? If I meet my deadline, yes. My editor is hoping for a spring release. My mother pushed her dessert around her plate. I suppose we'll have to wait for the movie version, she said. A half-hearted attempt at humor that fell flat. Actually, I replied, if you'd like to read it before then, I could send you the galleys once they're ready. The offer hung in the air, a tentative olive branch. My father cleared his throat. I'd like that, he said quietly. I'd like to read your books. All of them. Michael nodded in agreement. Me too. I can't believe my little sister is a famous author and I didn't even know. I'm not exactly famous, I clarified. Literary fiction isn't exactly celebrity status. Your Wikipedia page would disagree, Jessica remarked with a smile. And so would the New York Times. After dessert, we moved to the living room. My mother excused herself to the kitchen, claiming she needed to start on the dishes, though I suspected she needed space to process everything that had happened. Jessica touched Michael's arm. Why don't you help your mom? I'd love to chat with Rachel a bit more about her work. Michael seemed relieved to have a direction and headed to the kitchen. My father mumbled something about checking the score of the Indians' game and disappeared into his den, leaving Jessica and me alone. As soon as they were out of earshot, Jessica turned to me with an apologetic expression. I'm so sorry if I caused problems, she said. I had no idea they didn't know about your career. It's not your fault, I assured her. This has been building for years. It probably needed to happen. Jessica nodded thoughtfully. I recognized your name immediately, she confessed. When Michael mentioned his sister Rachel was a writer in New York, I wondered if it might be you. But when I got here and no one mentioned your books, I thought I must be mistaken. So, the Google search at dinner was deliberate, she admitted. When your mom made that comment about you being a nobody, I couldn't believe it. I knew I'd read your work. I thought maybe showing them would. She trailed off, looking uncertain. Force them to acknowledge me? I suggested. She nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. Was that terrible of me? I considered the question. No. I finally said, maybe it needed to come from someone outside the family. They might never have believed me. We were interrupted by Michael's return from the kitchen. He sat beside Jessica, looking at me with new eyes. Mom's upset, he reported. Dad's talking to her in the kitchen now. I'm sorry about that, I said, meaning it. Despite everything, I hadn't wanted to hurt them. Michael shook his head. Don't apologize. I'm the one who should be sorry. I never realized. He paused, struggling with his words. I never saw how they treated you differently. I was so caught up in my own stuff. You were a kid too, Michael, I reminded him. It wasn't your responsibility to fix our parents' behavior. Still, he insisted, I should have noticed. All those award ceremonies and publications you mentioned, I never even asked what you were doing in New York all these years. Not really. Jessica squeezed his hands supportively. The thing is, Michael continued, I always thought you were the lucky one. Mom and Dad were so focused on me, pushing me constantly towards success, monitoring every grade and achievement. You seemed free to do your own thing without all that pressure. I never realized the flip side of that freedom was invisibility. His perceptions stunned me. All those years I'd envied him the attention and approval. He'd envied me the freedom from scrutiny. It was a perspective I'd never considered. Maybe we can start over, he suggested. As adults, I want to know about your life, Rachel. Your real life, not the sanitized version you've been sharing at holidays. The offer touched me deeply. I'd like that, I said simply. My father appeared in the doorway, looking older than he had at dinner. Your mother needs some time, he said. This has been a lot to process. He sat heavily in his armchair, the same seat he'd occupied throughout my childhood. I've been looking through your author page on my phone, he admitted. The reviews, the awards, I had no idea, Rachel. No idea at all. I know, Dad, I said gently. No, you don't understand, he insisted. We failed you. I failed you. All those times you tried to tell us about your work, and we just didn't hear you. He looked up, his eyes damp. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. So proud. And I'm ashamed it took a stranger to make me see it. Jessica shifted uncomfortably at being called a stranger, but remained silent. It's not too late, I said, surprising myself with the words. To be interested. To be involved? If you want to be. He nodded firmly. We do. Your mother too, even if she can't say it yet. The evening ended earlier than planned. The emotional revelations had exhausted everyone. As I prepared to leave, Jessica hugged me warmly. This wasn't the dinner I expected, she said with a rueful smile. But I'm glad I finally got to meet the real Rachel Thompson. I'm a genuine fan of your work. Michael hugged me too, longer than usual. This doesn't fix everything, he said quietly. But it's a start, right? I nodded, unable to trust my voice. My father walked me to the door. Will you come back for Sunday dinner next week? He asked. I'll have read your first book by then. We could talk about it. The invitation, so simple yet so meaningful, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I'll be there, I promised. My mother remained in the kitchen, not emerging to say goodbye. I understood she needed time, that her worldview had been challenged in a fundamental way. Change wouldn't happen overnight. As I drove back to my hotel, I felt lighter somehow, as if a weight I'd carried for decades had begun to shift. My two separate lives had collided, and while the crash had been painful, perhaps something new and more authentic could emerge from the wreckage. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope that my next visit home might be different, that I might finally be seen, fully seen by the people who had shaped me for better and worse. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. 3 months after the dinner that changed everything, a package arrived at my Brooklyn apartment. The return address was my parents' home in Ohio. I opened it with curious fingers to find my books, not the copies I'd sent years ago, but new ones recently purchased. Inside the cover of Beneath Silent Waters was a note in my father's precise handwriting. Rachel, I've read this twice now. The first time to know the story, the second time to hear your voice in it. I'm sorry it took me so long to listen. Your words are beautiful. They matter. You matter. Love, Dad. I traced his handwriting with my fingertip, feeling the indentations on the page. In the 3 months since Jessica had Googled my name at the dinner table, small changes had accumulated like snowflakes, gradually transforming the landscape of my family relationships. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Michael's name appeared on the screen. Hey, did Dad's package arrive? He asked when I answered. Just opened it. I confirmed. It's unexpected. He ordered your books the day after that dinner, Michael said. He's been reading them over and over, Mom too, though she's less vocal about it. Our conversations had changed since that night. We spoke weekly now, longer talks that went beyond surface pleasantries. Michael had become genuinely interested in my life and work, asking thoughtful questions about my writing process and upcoming projects. How's the new book coming? He asked now. Just finished the second draft, I told him. My editor thinks it's the strongest thing I've written. That's great, Rachel. Really great. He paused. Actually, that's partly why I'm calling. Jessica and I were wondering if you'd consider doing a reading at our engagement party next month. From your work, I mean, something that matters to you. The invitation stunned me. Are you sure? It's your celebration. I don't want to take focus from us. Michael laughed. Rachel, my sister is a celebrated author. I'm proud of that. I want our friends and family to know who you really are, not the version we all pretended you were for so many years. His words touched me deeply. Then yes, I'd be honored. Great. And one more thing. Mom's been rearranging the seating chart for the dinner. She wants you at the main table with us and Jessica's parents. The significance of this wasn't lost on me. In our family, seating arrangements had always been hierarchical, with the most important guests placed closest to my parents. My traditional spot at family gatherings had been on the periphery, an afterthought. This change, small as it might seem to outsiders, represented a fundamental shift in family dynamics. Is Mom okay with all this? I asked cautiously. Michael sighed. She's trying, Rachel. It's not easy for her to admit how wrong she was all these years, but Dad's been surprisingly firm about it. I've never seen him stand up to her like this before. The thought of my father, typically so conflict-averse, advocating for me brought unexpected emotion. Jessica's been great too, Michael continued. She made Mom join her book club, and guess whose book they're reading next month? I laughed at the image. Mom in a book club discussing my novel? That I'd pay to see. She's nervous about it, Michael admitted. She's afraid she won't understand it properly or say the wrong thing. I think she's finally realizing what she missed all these years. After we hung up, I sat with my father's note and this new information, trying to process how much had changed in such a relatively short time. The family pattern established over decades was being rewritten, awkwardly but genuinely. My mother had called the previous week, our conversation stilted but revealing. She'd mentioned, almost casually, that she'd told her bridge club about my books. Marilyn Jenkins' daughter is an English professor at Ohio State, she'd said. She's apparently assigned your novel in her contemporary literature course. Marilyn was quite impressed when I mentioned you were my daughter. The pride in her voice, however reluctant, was new. She was discovering, perhaps for the first time, that my achievements could reflect positively on her, just as Michael's always had. It wasn't the pure, unconditional recognition I might have wished for, but it was progress. The engagement party came faster than expected. I arrived at my parents' home with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The house looked different somehow, though nothing had physically changed. Perhaps it was my perception that had shifted. Jessica greeted me with a warm hug. I'm so glad you're here early. Come see the setup in the backyard. The garden had been transformed with string lights and floral arrangements. A small podium stood near the patio with a microphone. For your reading, Jessica explained. I hope that's okay. Some of my family are big fans of your work. My cousin Abigail teaches English and uses your stories in her classes. Inside, my mother was directing caterers with her usual precision. She paused when she saw me, her expression softening slightly. Rachel, good you're here. I've put you at table 1 with us and the Clarks, she said, referring to Jessica's parents. And I've told the bartender to have champagne ready for after your reading. Such consideration from her was unprecedented. Thanks, Mom, I said simply, not wanting to make too much of it and risk her retreating. Your hair looks nice, she added awkwardly. The length suits you. It was a small compliment, but from my mother, it felt significant. My father emerged from his den, face lighting up when he saw me. Rachel? He embraced me with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. I finished your second book last week. The scene where the protagonist confronts her mentor at the awards ceremony, brilliant writing. We talked about the book for several minutes, a surreal experience in this house where my writing had been invisible for so long. My father had always been an avid reader, but now he was reading my words, engaging with my thoughts, seeing me through my work. As guests began to arrive, I observed a subtle but significant change. When my mother introduced me to her friends, she didn't just say, "This is Rachel, our daughter." Instead, she said, "This is Rachel, our daughter, the author." Her books have won several major awards. The pride in her voice, however newfound, was unmistakable. She was learning, late but perhaps not too late, to see me clearly. Michael and Jessica circulated among guests, stopping often to include me in conversations, making sure I wasn't relegated to the background as had been the pattern at family gatherings throughout my life. When it came time for my reading, Jessica's father introduced me with genuine admiration, listing my accomplishments with the respect they deserved. I approached the podium feeling a complex mixture of emotions, vulnerability at sharing my work in this setting, pride in my accomplishments, and lingering traces of the insecure daughter I had been for so long. I had chosen a passage for my second novel, a scene where a character finally finds her voice after years of silence. As I read, I was aware of my parents listening intently, perhaps hearing echoes of our own complicated relationship in the fictional narrative. The applause afterward was enthusiastic. My mother, to my surprise, wiped tears from her eyes. Later, as the party wound down, she approached me where I stood chatting with Jessica's mother. Your reading was beautiful, she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. I never knew you could write like that. You never asked to know, I replied, not accusingly but stating a simple truth. She nodded, acknowledging the point. I'm asking now, she said. Better late than never? It was offered as a question, tentative and uncertain. The mother who had always been so confident, so sure of her opinions and judgments, was asking for a second chance. Better late than never, I agreed. Our relationship would never be perfect. Too much water had flowed under that particular bridge. But the current was changing direction. slowly but perceptibly. Where once there had been dismissal and invisibility, there was now recognition, however belated. As I drove back to New York the next day, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The painful years of being overlooked had fueled my determination to succeed, to create work that demanded attention. The irony wasn't lost on me that my family's failure to see me had ultimately made me more visible to the world. I had never written for their approval or recognition. I had written because I had to, because the stories inside me demanded release. Yet there was an undeniable satisfaction in finally being seen by the people who had shaped me, for better and worse. My phone dinged with a text from Michael. Dad just ordered your books for his whole golf club. Mom's horrified about the inappropriate language they'll all read. Progress comes in strange forms. I laughed out loud in my empty car. Progress indeed. The invisible daughter had finally been seen. The nobody had become somebody, not because a Google search had revealed my accomplishments, but because I had persisted in believing my voice mattered, even when those who should have heard it first didn't listen. That persistence, more than any award or recognition, was the true measure of my success. So what about you? Have you ever been underestimated by family or friends? How did you respond when they finally recognized your achievements? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Also, if you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more real-life experiences. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need a reminder that being overlooked doesn't define your worth. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, sometimes the people who see you clearly are the ones you least expect. Your voice matters always.